The attic room was quiet now. There were no screams, no footsteps on the stairs, no one forcing her to talk. The chair still sat in the middle of the room, its leather back scuffed, and it was covered in residue from duct tape restraints. There were crimson red stains on the floor. The steam iron was now unplugged. The garden shears were now leaning in the corner. The men who had come and gone every day, they stopped. There was no longer any reason for them to be there. For the people that did this, the silence was the plan. The room was scrubbed clean. The furniture was torn out. The carpet ripped up. Everything erased. Well, almost.
Young men for extortion, abduction, tying up. See you. Bye.
By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you true crime documentaries and other things that you may later regret knowing, with at least 2 new videos every single week. Please do join the incredibly supportive Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now. I'm currently aiming for 250,000 subs, and we're getting so close now. And I appreciate every single one of you, really I do, I'm not just saying that, so thank you. Make sure you join the Dark Case newsletter too so you never miss an upload. It has around 300 members right now, and I'm going to be launching it when we hit 500. The link is in the comments and in the description, and it literally takes 5 seconds to do. But now, let's go on with the video. Lynda Spence was a 27-year-old financial advisor living in Glasgow. She was warm, generous, charismatic, and ambitious. She liked the high life, fast cars, champagne, designer clothes, and she definitely had the charm and the drive, but she also had some secrets. Behind her polished image was a storm of debt and deception. She'd been declared bankrupt in 2008, owing nearly £40,000. But that didn't stop her. A year later, she founded Fraser Properties, a mortgage and lettings company that barely existed on paper. She told people that she was married to a well-connected Albanian man, but it was later revealed that that was just a sham. It actually seemed that Lynda had no loyalty to anyone other than herself. She had in fact been recruited as a confidential informant by Scottish and UK organised crime agencies. She was juggling real estate scams and government informant work all at once, and for a while she made it work. She managed to stay afloat, but then the lies caught up, and in a way that nobody would have been able to predict. Lynda owed some serious money to some very dangerous people. One of them was a man named Colin Coats. He was a violent career criminal, and he had a history of threats, intimidation, and assault. This included an air raid attack on a flight, where he attacked a flight attendant and threatened his fellow passengers. Coats had invested £85,000 with Lynda. He thought he was going to get a tidy return, but instead, Lynda blew his money. And to cover her tracks, she did something pretty desperate. She paid a Glasgow printer to make fake Danish government bonds, allegedly worth over £6 million. Coats was then shown these forgeries as proof that a multi-million-pound deal was in fact on the way. But of course, this was all fake. It was all completely worthless. And it didn't take Coats long to realise that he had in fact been conned. And this didn't just make him angry, it made him want revenge. So on April 14th, 2011, Coats and his close friend Philip Wade, a known dealer, put their plan in motion. They lured Lynda to Coates' home in Glasgow, then they forced her into a car. Her panicking wouldn't help her, nor would her pleading. She was driven 40 miles to a quiet village on the west coast, West Kilbride. There, in the attic room of a nondescript flat in Meadowfoot Road, Lynda's final chapter began. Flat 4, 114 Meadowfoot Road. To the outside world, it looked like nothing more than a modest apartment in a sleepy coastal town. Inside, though, was a very different story. They had created a chamber of horrors. For the next 2 weeks, Lynda was held captive in that attic room. She was duct taped to a leather office chair. She was not allowed to use a bathroom. She had no access to fresh clothes or to food unless her captors permitted it. And every day, the torture only escalated. She was burned with a hot steam iron. Her toes were crushed. Her kneecaps were shattered with a golf club. Her hands had been wrapped in surgical tape to cover wounds and burns that they had created, and piece by piece, parts of her were taken, the tip of her little finger, and then her thumb. According to witnesses, this wasn't just torture for torture's sake. It was a punishment, it was a show of control, and it was also extortion. Coates and Wade wanted their information. They wanted names, they wanted account numbers, they wanted information on deals that Lynda had made. They were convinced that she had the money hidden somewhere, but as the days passed, it became clear that she had nothing left to give. One of the men who had helped to guard Lynda at the flat, a man named Paul Smith, later said she was beaten whilst being interrogated. He said that Coates would come in day after day to inflict the pain while Wade watched on. So in fact, two other men knew that this was happening in that attic, David Parker and Paul Smith. They were recruited by Coates and Wade to act as minders. They were paid to sit in the flat, to keep Lynda contained, and to do so they were offered money. They claimed they did it because they were scared. They admitted that they gave Lynda soup and tea, but they never untied her. They never let her go, and they certainly never called for help. Smith explained why to detectives, saying, "I quite liked my fingers the way they were." Parker was in fact the flat's tenant, and he said that he knew Lynda was injured, but that he didn't want to know the full details. He remembered the moment that Coates had shoved hacksaw blades through his front door, and that was when he knew that things had turned really deadly. By late April, Coates had extracted enough information to confront another of Lynda's former associates, a man named John Glenn. He was also someone that Lynda had scammed. Coates met Glenn on April the 20th, and he presented him with a gruesome trophy. It was a plastic bag containing what he claimed was Lynda's thumb. Glenn was obviously terrified. He paid Coates immediately, and 1 week later on April the 27th, Coates and Wade told Parker and Smith that they could leave the flat, that they had now made up their minds, and that Lynda was not going to survive. And by the end of April 2011, Lynda Spence was no longer alive. Coates and Wade were next spotted in the seaside village of Teenabrook in Argyll. They arrived in Lynda's rental car, and they asked a local man if they could use his boat. That man, Lee Wynyard, would later say, "I thought I was being asked to dispose of a body." And so he denied their request, and after that moment, both Lynda and the car were gone forever. For weeks, Lynda's family had no idea what had happened. In June of 2011, her mother Patricia sobbed through a televised news appeal, begging for any information. And behind the scenes, the police were struggling. Witnesses involved in the case were terrified. Evidence was minimal, but then they recognized the mistake. On August the 15th, Colin Coats made a move that would bring everything tumbling down. He cornered John Glenn once again, the same man that he'd previously threatened with a severed thumb, and strangely this time he forced him to strip his clothing in an attempt to extort him of even more money. But that was the final straw. Glenn went straight to the police. He now told them everything. From there, detectives started connecting the dots. They questioned Smith and Parker, the two babysitters, and they eventually admitted their roles in Lynda's captivity. And then right-hand man Wade, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, confessed to a friend that he'd helped get rid of a body. At the same time, forensic investigators returned to Parker's flat in West Kilbride. It had been thoroughly cleaned, it had been bleached from top to bottom. The furniture had all been removed. The carpets and floorboards were replaced. But this job was somehow not thorough enough. Lynda's red DNA was found on the linoleum floor near the bathroom, and Colin Coats' fingerprint was recovered from inside the flat. This was enough to go to trial. Just a heads up, after the trial, there is still one huge twist, so make sure you watch until the end. The trial of Colin Coats, Philip Wade, David Parker and Paul Smith began in the High Court in Glasgow. It lasted 11 weeks. Jurors were shown graphic evidence of what Lynda had endured. They heard about the steam iron, about the crushed toes, and they learned of the severed fingers. They were told how she wasn't allowed to leave the chair, not even to use the bathroom. Witnesses testified that Coats boasted about the murder. Others described how the flat had become a place that was used for regular torture sessions. Coats' defense tried to claim that Lynda had willingly gone to the flat, that she had chosen to hide there because of threats made by other business rivals. They even suggested that she might still be alive, that she had simply taken the opportunity to flee, to start a new life. The jury, though, they didn't buy it. Colin Coats was unanimously convicted of abduction, torture and murder, and of disposing of the body. Wade was found guilty of the same. He, though, was cleared of one specific allegation, that being the removal of the head, but he was found guilty of every other charge. Parker and Smith were originally charged with murder, but they pled guilty to reduced charges of holding Lynda against her will, of attacking her, and of helping to cover up the crime. The judge, Lord Pentland, had strong words for Coats and Wade. He described the crime as truly monstrous and barbaric. He called Coats the prime mover, a manipulative and dangerous man with no regard for human life. Wade was labelled a violent and dangerous man, but he was entirely lacking of respect for civilised society. By the end of the trial, justice had been served, but for Lynda's parents, there was no closure. After the guilty verdicts came down, after the media headlines and the public horror, Colin Coats wasn't finished. He wanted to challenge his conviction, but it wasn't because of new forensic evidence. It wasn't because a witness recanted their statements. His legal team argued that a video, released just days before the jury's decision, had prejudiced the entire trial. The footage appeared in a Daily Record's iPad edition on March 29, 2013. It stayed online until April 2nd, just before the verdict was reached.
New gangster in town. Young men for extortion, abduction, tying up, only during funerals or mitzvahs. Call 1-800-SUPER. See you. Bye.
His legal team argued that the publication of this clip, just before the jury returned its verdict, was enough to violate his rights to a fair trial. Gordon Jackson KC, speaking for the defence, said the material was so prejudicial that it may have crossed the line. He asked the Court of Criminal Appeal in Edinburgh to allow the case to be reopened on that basis, but the Crown pushed back hard. Advocate Depute Douglas Fairley KC said the entire appeal was built on an erroneous factual basis, and Lord Carloway presiding didn't make a ruling immediately. He said more information was needed about exactly what had been seen and when, and the court convened the matter until the following month. But the core question lingered. Could this bizarre video, appearing online just days before the sentencing, unravel justice in one of Scotland's most harrowing murder trials? Would he now get off easy for his horrifying actions? Well, no. Despite the appeal, the sentences handed down in the original trial still stood. David Parker was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months for his role in holding Lynda captive and helping to clean up after the fact. Paul Smith received 11 years for the same. Colin Coats was sentenced to life imprisonment. He must serve a minimum of 33 years before he is eligible for parole. Philip Wade was given life as well. His minimum term is 30 years. The verdicts brought some relief to Lynda's parents, but no peace. They released a statement after the trial saying, "No verdict will bring our daughter back or spare her the terrible ordeal that took her life. We cannot begin to understand or forgive what they did to our daughter, Lynda." They described her as warm, kind and thoughtful, someone who always had time for others. We miss her so much. How exactly her time came to a close, it's still unknown, but what we do have are the accounts of people who spoke to Coats while he was in prison. One inmate, a man named Peter Hadley, testified that Coats had confessed everything. He said that Lynda had tape over her mouth, that he pinched her nose and he held it until she no longer struggled. He then claimed to have removed her head and then cremated her in a furnace. Detective Superintendent Alan Buchanan, the man who led the investigation, echoed the family's pain. He said, although satisfied with the verdict, the pain for the Spence family continues. because due to the actions of the accused, they have been unable to lay their daughter to rest. He urged Coats and Wade to do one final thing, to tell police where Lynda's body was. But to this day, that still hasn't happened. Justice may have been served in court, but the Spence family is still waiting for their chance to say goodbye. This is just one more case in which I think the no body, no parole law should be brought in. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.